Okay, the last video we talked about parenting and unparenting, and it really didn't have anything to do with kids, although it did have to do with child bones. And now I'm going to show you the tools that I'm using to do these things. And I want to make this distinction very clear. While this is essentially, at the bottom line, about saving and loading bone animations, the tool that I'm using to do that isn't the only way that you can do that. Saving and loading bone animations can be invoked. It comes from my utilities file. So I have a routine that saves and a routine that loads. And it can be used or called from a variety of different places. It doesn't have to be called from this particular script. The particular script I'm calling it from is how I manipulate my bones on the timeline. But you can manipulate bones using any of the other bone tools here or whatever bone tools of your own making, and then still save and load bones using these routines. I want to make that distinction clear because if you, as I'm showing you how I use this tool, and you say, you know, I just don't like the way you work with those bones. That's not the important thing. Eventually, we're going to get to that. But for now, this is how I'm going to work with the bones. And my tool, which I call the Swiss Army tool because it's basically my one go-to tool for bone animations. I may rename that at some point, but in any case, that's what it's named now. And my tool is very simple. When you click on a bone and you drag it, click and drag, it moves using the IK chain, and I don't actually remember what that's called. That's there's a bone tool that does that. What is that bone tool that does that? It is manipulate bones. It's essentially it's manipulate bones. Basically, what it does is it takes whatever the bone is in the last part of the chain and applies IK to it, so you can get some interesting movements to there. Also, if you hold down the Alt key, then it only rotates the bones, and that's very similar to that manipulate bone key. If you hold down the Control key, it will scale the bone. So it does those things based on the same thing as that manipulate bone tool does. That's for normal bones. When I say normal bones, I mean any bone other than target and root bones. For the root bone, the default behavior is to transform it. You know, see, as I grab that bone, it transforms it. There's no and then if I hold down the Alt, it rotates it. There's no real need to scale that bone, so I don't have a scale option on that. Rotating and moving are the two things, and since I normally mostly transform it and possibly rotate it, that's the default behavior on that. For target bones, the default behavior is transform, and it's transform only. You can't rotate it because there's really no sense in rotating a target bone. The target bone is really just a place for another bone to point to at the end of. So a rotation of it doesn't give you anything extra. So you can't rotate it, you can't scale it. That's all you can do with it. But I want you to notice that my tool is smart enough to know what kind of bone you're grabbing. So based on the bone, and it doesn't have to do with the names, it has to do with the bone behavior. It knows whether a bone is a root bone or a target bone or a bone that is neither one of those, and it behaves accordingly. So that's what my tool does. It also does some other things. For example, if I double click, it sets the rig to its default behavior, and that would be default behavior as of the frame 0. So it resets it. That's helpful to me. Also, if I'm not moving, if I'm dragging and moving, if I just hold the Shift key down and click on it, it will then flop the entire bone rig over to one side so that it repositions it so I'm facing the other direction. It also does the same thing on the head. That's a little peculiar to my particular rig because for it to work properly, you actually have to have a layer called head. And this happens to be a group layer, but any layer called head would be flipped accordingly. But the actual flipping of the bone itself doesn't depend upon any naming convention. What else does this do? Okay, and then the other thing it does, we talked about parenting and unparenting. If you notice Shift-Alt on the Mac, I think it's Shift-Option. Shift-Alt will then parent or unparent. So right now, see, now it's unparented. So now if I grab the root and move it, you notice it's there. And if I move along here, and then I do Shift-Alt, it parents it. And what it does to parent and unparent, basically, if you look down, is that it basically, I'm going over here to my Mac and putting it into sleep because my cat woke it up by walking across the keys. That's too much information, I know. Anyway, what it does, if you've ever parented and unparented a bone yourself on the timeline, you might notice that what it does is it puts keys in the previous time when it's parented, or unparented either way, to hold that position, because as it parents and unparents, the relationship it changes in the transform matrix is different. And you don't really have to understand that, but just know that my tool does that for you, so you don't have to worry about that. So anyway, so that's how I work on the timeline with both parenting and unparenting, is that I use that tool. There's other things the bone does. I remember it does save and loading. I'm going to get to that in a second. It shows you the name of the current bone that you've selected. It has some other items up here that I'm going to possibly remove. These are holdovers from my old bone rigging, or my own rigs. But the one thing that is significant, no, actually that's not even significant. Okay, all right, that's all. So I'm gonna next talk about the actual guts of everything, the actual loading and saving of the bone animations.